We're about to take this trip. We hope you can join us. We're going to check in with experts along the way and brands to hear how what they're doing is impacting their conversion all around the globe. We'll see you soon. What's up, guys? We're going to talk to Matt from Global E right here in the studio about all things website localization. You've heard it from me, but now let's hear it from someone else. What is the data telling them? What are the solutions they've created so that the overseas consumer has a better experience both on the site and in the shipping experience and the after-sales experience all together? Let's check it out. Matt, tell us a little bit about how you got into the whole global space and how you came to work at Global E.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, when I started my career, at first started off in the logistics arena, following kind of the family, let's just say ties, if you would, from my father who, really launched his career in operations down through my brother that did the same and jump into a world of logistics. And then obviously seeing the world of e-commerce, let's just say, evolve as quickly and as fast-paced as it did within the world of logistics, and the ties that the two had together really pulled me into the world of e-commerce fully. And here I am at Global E, obviously responsible here for the North America business, and yeah, excited to be here.
What is Global E? What's the pain point that you are fulfilling with your service?
Absolutely. I think, when you look at the overall services as a whole, what Globally is doing is breaking down barriers, right? We're breaking down barriers to international trade that are out there and exist today. And I think it all really begins from the journey of an international customer expecting nothing different than a domestic consumer experience that a U.S. customer would get, right? So, as our U.S. brands and retailers throughout the world, for that matter, tailor their experiences to their home markets, that shopping experience is no different when you look at it internationally, right? So it all starts from the second that site experience begins and that consumer hits the website to making sure that, he or she is served up in their local currency and their local experience, all the way throughout, just the uncontrollable elements that exist today in duty and tax, right? And being able to understand how to serve up duty and tax in a localized experience that speaks to that consumer in that local market, right? So I think it really does contain a full end-to-end gamut when you look at things like shipping and duties and taxes and price strategies and insights into how to communicate with that consumer. But it is really a full end-to-end, offering that obviously is going to tailor to that consumer.
Could you walk me through the steps that a company should do to optimize for engaging with overseas consumers?
What is your market proposition? Are you serving that customer in local currency? How are you converting that currency and showing that currency price point to that consumer in that market, right? Where it's very common to round to the nearest 100 yen within Japan and where it's very common in the 0.95 within the Europe region. So I think all these elements are part of the experience that really drive an overall, let's just say, international landscape. And then that's just the front end, right? I think when you get into, let's just say, the overall checkout experience is just one of the most important places for a consumer to convert, and conversion and the importance that it brings, obviously, to, an overall customer is it's got to be internationally geared for conversion, right? So a simple one-step checkout is a must when you look at international conversion, right? I think there's been multiple iterations and lessons learned along, our brands and even our business and the history, and taking it back to when we first launched, a multi-step checkout, right? So I think starting with that localization, hyper-localized checkout experience, making sure that from an international language perspective, you have an option, right? You have an option for that customer to speak to them in their local, language and local, experience, to be able to say, hey, where there's a city, we show a city. Where there's a state, we show a state. Where there's a province, that we show a province. And then obviously, when you look at duty and tax strategy, how and where to place it for a consumer within Europe varies greatly within a consumer, that resides in Canada. So I think when you look at the differences and how to speak to that customer, it's critically important. And then, as you can imagine, payments is just as important, right? Being able to make sure that you have and can convert that customer with whatever he or she desires to pay within that local market is going to be an extremely critical point to that full end-to-end experience.
IP triggered. Welcome, Matt.
Yeah, so welcome mat and IP triggered welcome mat, I think is critical to drive down bounce rate for that international customer, to give them a real comfortability factor, to let them know that they can begin their buying journey and that the critical core components are communicated from the second that they begin that journey, right? So yes, we accept currency in your local currency. Yes, we accept your local payment methods, and we're going to be able to convert you with whatever you have in your wallet is critically important. And then I think also as you look at that pricing strategy, right, through the, let's just say the overall marketing banner and knowing what to say, in what language, in what market is key. If you're going to spend all of this effort building a price strategy throughout the journey and communicate it properly, make sure that messaging is complete and concise. The top line banner is actually additional content that our brands typically use to communicate and really drive home the pricing strategy and market proposition that they've built up, right? And that could be as simple as just free shipping over, 55 euros into a market like Germany. And it could be, into 200, plus GBP into a market like the UK.
Thanks, Matt. Matt, you've talked about how you guys do 100 plus currency offering in the right way. What does that mean?
So what it means to offer 100 plus different currencies is that, number one, you're going to serve up that local consumer with a local currency that is relatable to him or her in that market, right? So as you can imagine, as a domestic US shopper, I'm going to be very accustomed to shopping in USD. And I'm going to expect to see every one of my international e-commerce, let's just say domestic e-commerce experiences in USD. So first off, it just comes with having currency enabled, which is just the first part of it. And then I think what happens after that is we look at, okay, from a marketing rounding perspective, every market has localized rounding rules and conventions built out on a currency basis, right? So whether it's rounded to the nearest 100 yen into Japan, whether it's to the 0.95 within the euro, whether it's to the 0.95 in the US, these are all conventions that need to be built out and thought through.
It's funny, I never really think about it when you say, yeah, I get the fact that in some countries $9.99 might sound a lot cheaper than $10 and there's a marketing component, but when actually translating a $10 item now to a local currency and you get those decimal points, you guys actually round up. How does a company deal with it if they're not using a solution like that? Can they even deal with it?
It's important, and when you round currency and when you really look at the approach to say, hey, how do I make this price look familiar? How do I make it so it's one that's going to convert? Then how do I use that margin to help really fund, the overall free shipping, let's just say, approaches that we have in market, or free duty or free tax or whatever that may be. It's something that's critically important. And I think brands, overlook that. I think far too often do I see just a currency converter tool, even an established tool, that's just literally taking a USD price point, converting it and spitting out a number, which is something that I think is critically important to make sure that, brands look after this, and make sure that it's part of any international consumer they look to put out in market.
So Matt, as you started to bring up the idea of translation, I like to talk about incremental ways to translate your site. Could you talk a little bit about those special kind of steps that you might want to take? And when you talk about how many languages you have optimized or you have integrated, does that mean the whole site, or are those critical parts in that journey?
I think all these elements, including down to, let's just say, language translation, and in a language like Arabic, where you're going to give that customer the option to override your native English experience, because this is the most critical point. They don't want to mess up. Right? So if we're going to put them in their local language, which we support up to over 26 languages today, out of the box, we're going to flip the Arabic reading orientation from left to right to right to left, because that is obviously what's hyper localized and common in that market. So I think all those elements come together, and it really pulls together, the overall conversion optics as we look at getting that customer through the door and making that purchase.
Obviously, you're saying, when you're dealing with your checkout and your checkout is now optimized, and essentially you're saying, yes, I can fulfill globally, even if some companies are saying, well, I really don't have much sales overseas yet, I don't know why I have to optimize. It's because you've now created another data point for you where you're saying, hey, the rest of my site's in English. The moment I get to that checkout, I'm going to see customer behavior. And if they localize at that point because you've given them that option, then it starts to drive other incremental changes.
Exactly. And I think from a localization perspective, as you see these brands, like the focus is always, let's get up a localized experience. Let's make sure that we are, before we even think about driving eyeballs to our traffic, before we even think about putting investment into a certain market, let's make sure that we have that overall experience streamlined, so that I'm not spending all sorts of money to, either through Google or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be, to be able to drive traffic to your site. The last thing you want to do is send a brand new customer that you've spent a lot of money and effort and time, acquiring, to then, have them hit your site and have it be completely foreign to them, right? So, equip your site, make sure it's ready for, the demand that's going to come. And then also let's improve on and communicate to your existing base that you've got a loyal customer base built out on globally. And let's let them know that there's improvements coming.
Can you talk a little bit about that D&T solution, the duties and tax calculations? Do you guarantee kind of up or down on that? And also talk a little bit about the trends you're seeing in DDP, delivery duties paid, versus DDU, delivery duties unpaid, for the consumers.
Yeah, so duty and tax strategy is a critical key component. Far too often believe it or not, do brands think that just obtaining a duty and tax solution is going to, obviously accelerate and grow their international business, because really it's the full end-to-end solution that, is going to make that happen. But I think as a key component, I can tell you there are many different ways to, number one, do we guarantee it? 100%. We will guarantee it to both the merchant and to the consumer, because this is an element that brands just cannot afford to take a risk on. We all know that customs is an art, it's not a science. So there's never going to be a single day where you're going to be able to be as precise as 100% accurate on every single clearance of your products globally throughout the world.
For those people at home, obviously, we've talked about this before. Understand, as Matt said, it's an art, not a science. Why is that? Because you've got a customs duty officer who's saying, well, this has a jacket, it's got fur on it. Is that a synthetic fur? Is it not synthetic fur? Is there a piece of anything that's could be, construed as coming from a different origin of organic or agricultural? There's a billion different places that this can go wrong. There's no perfect organization. There's a few handfuls of big players in the space in terms of D&T calculations, but having an organization or a company that can help guarantee that and is there with you and incentivized to do so is obviously a game changer.
Duty and tax gets complex when you look at every single market, right? So I think when you look at some of the most mature markets, you're going to see, quite a bit of adoption where they prefer to prepay it, right? Into a market like Canada, 93+% consumers are always going to want to prepay duties and taxes when given the choice. And I think it's very consistent all throughout Europe, Australia, similar, even though there's high de minimis and low duty rates into Australia. But I think when you look at a market like, for example, Brazil, right? Typically what we recommend to brands is you want to force duties and taxes. You want to give them only one option, which is going to be DDP only, right? And the reason for that is there's a lot of uncontrollable costs from a duty and tax perspective, starting with a 75% ICMS tax into a market like Brazil, where this shirt could cost you $100, and then by the time it reaches that market and that consumer, if you were to ever offer a DDU type experience, that consumer is going to think twice about even accepting delivery, right? To have to pay another $125 in a market like Brazil in a DDU type experience, you should never do. Argentina is very similar, right? So I think that's one example where you want to force it. When we look at, a market like Canada, you always want to make sure that you're giving them, we call it partial force, which basically means we're going to show tax at the point of checkout. Duty, we're going to help the brand build it into the product cost.
Globally's technology integration, you guys work with different marketplaces of different platforms.
So we do. So from a technology perspective, we've invested, and I'd say it's one of the main reasons why, brands continue to come to us across various different platforms, right? But we've invested a lot of effort, a lot of money along the years to be able to build directly, into each one of these e-commerce platforms. And for custom shops, we've of course created our own module that allows, we call it our Globally module, GEM module, but it allows the brands to integrate in a very seamless, lightweight, efficient way versus having to, let's just say, build API bridges to all downstream systems such as, ERP systems, WMS systems, and so on and so forth. So basically, by having built into the native platforms, these brands are able to, really manage their business from their platform. They don't have to think about Global E as, an onset to a different system that I have to figure out how to somehow connect and manage in a separate system. This is all built into their platform. So they know that any piece of data, any piece of transaction that is made, they have full visibility to it the same way they would domestically. And that is critically important for many, and I wouldn't even call it many, I'd call it all of our brands.
We're saying, so I just want to get a little further in there. So you're saying an order comes in, I don't have that many, I'm not going to start training staff, I'm not going to start building out a new system, but your system will generate a label for me. I pop it on a box. That label might be international and ready to go, but I'm going to ship that then to your warehouse, or how am I doing that?
It's actually, when you look from a shipping perspective internationally, we're agnostic to it. So yes, we've got warehouses all throughout the world, in the US and Europe and so on and so forth. So for all of our brand partners, they've got the option to ship to us domestically if they don't want to have any hassle at all. And we'll do all the markings, the international labelings within our facility on our brand's behalf. But alternatively to that, we've also seen a big adoption in brands wanting to ship direct, wanting to cut out that overall domestic warehouse fulfillment touch and just basically label a shipment straight from our system to the end consumer, which is completely an option as well. And I think from our perspective, I wouldn't call Global E a fulfillment service, right? So we're not doing the typical pick, pack, and fulfillment for our brands, but we're acting as a cross-dock facility, right? So if a brand has a shipment that, is going to be traveling internationally, and let's just say, they want to be able to just do nothing outside of ship it domestically and be done, they can do it. Right? They can send it to us, and then we'll literally induct that shipment, scan it into our facility, over-label it with an international label, provide commercial invoice documentation where it's needed, and then we'll move that shipment out so the brand has little to no involvement or risk in having to process an order any differently than they do today.
All right, the big moment, right? What is the cost structure to work with a Global E for some of these SME brands, let's say? What are the different tiers of solutions you have?
So I think from a cost perspective, we keep it very simple, right? I think it's a revenue share model. I think it's very common to the overall market, right? And then, obviously with each of the brands, what we do is we scope and we shape and size each and every single one of them, right? So we look at what, in analytics, a full discussion on what their overall, let's just say, current situation looks like, where and how and what we think they can be after they enable a platform like us, which is extremely important because we know some brands who enable some, different, let's just say, experiences today, once they come over to Global E, we have a very good indication on how and what type of growth we'll see from an overall increase in revenue perspective. So we look at each and study each brand differently, and obviously we work off of a very let's just say efficient service fee model that we help place brands with and help them really begin to scale their business globally without having to to worry about giving up too much of a piece of their overall margin.
Yeah, and I've heard companies analyze your fees, and then when they look at the savings they get on logistics and some of the other management, their comment is, look, I might be able to piece together 5 different solutions to come up with my equivalent of a Global E, but it's going to cost me a lot more. I'm going to have to manage a lot more service providers, so I might as well do this. Is that something that you probably hear a lot?
It is, and I think, when you look at the overall cost structure, typically a brand will end up paying, anywhere between 2.5% and 3% just in payment processing, right? And I think when you look at that overall kind of percentage, that doesn't even include things like fraud, right? And then you get into, okay, well, now I need to add a 0.5 point for fraud. Now you're looking at brands who typically in the SME segment are up and around just to take payment with traditional payment methods at about 3.5%. And that doesn't even include anything as far as any alternative payment methods, as far as having a currency solution, as far as thinking about the risk from a duty and tax perspective. And when you piece together all these places, and then that's not even to say, how do I get out and make sure that I register in markets like Australia or New Zealand or Norway or Switzerland or soon to be the UK come, January of 2021 when they break off of the European region, if in fact it happens. But, these are things that, are unaccounted for.
Matt, thanks so much for giving your time. You're always so generous with your input, and it's been so helpful for me. And I know it's been helpful for a lot of brands listening in. So thank you again.
Josh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. And thanks again.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.